Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're jumping into something pretty fundamental about law, how we figure out what laws actually mean and how they get applied. It's crucial stuff, but honestly, rarely simple.
It really is, because laws are written by people, right? And people can't predict every single situation, so you need ways to handle that. That's where interpretation and construction come in.
Okay, so interpretation is just figuring out the words themselves.
Yeah, basically finding the true meaning of the words on the page. But construction, that's a bit more involved. It's about drawing conclusions, warranted ones, about what the legislature intended, especially if a specific situation isn't spelled out clearly.
So construction kicks in when the text itself is kind of fuzzy or silent on a point.
Exactly. Though it's worth noting the courts themselves sometimes use the terms almost interchangeably. The main thing, really, is understanding the goal and, importantly, the limits on whoever is doing the construing, usually a judge.
Okay, let's get into that. What's the absolute number one guiding principle when a judge has to tackle a confusing law?
It's simple, at least in theory. The only goal, the singular purpose, is to figure out and then give effect to the true intent of the legislature.
Not what the judge thinks is fair or better, but what the lawmakers who wrote it actually meant.
Precisely. It's all about finding that original mandate. All the other rules you hear about, they're just tools to get to that intent.
That sounds like it could lead to tension, though, following the exact words versus the vibe of the law. I remember reading about that idea, the letter killeth, but the spirit vivifieth. You follow the spirit.
That's the core tension, absolutely. Sometimes, though, the legislature tries to help out. They actually write rules for interpretation into the law itself.
Oh, right. Well, like in the Civil Code, it says if there's doubt, you have to assume they intended right and justice to prevail.
Exactly. Or think about the Labor Code. It explicitly says any doubts must be resolved in favor of labor. That kind of guidance takes away some of the guesswork for the judge.
But when that guidance isn't there, who gets to make the call?
That power falls squarely on the judiciary. It's a key part of the separation of powers. If the legislature doesn't like how a court interprets a law, their move isn't to argue with the judge.
They have to change the law itself, amend it or repeal it.
Correct. That's their remedy.
Okay, so the courts have this power, but it's not like they can just jump in whenever they feel like it, right? There has to be a trigger.
Absolutely. The trigger is ambiguity. A court can only step in to construe a statute if the text is genuinely doubtful, or if it could reasonably mean two or more different things.
And if it's not ambiguous, if the language is crystal clear,
then the court's hands are tied, in a way. That's where the verba legis rule, the plain meaning rule, comes in. If a statute is clear, plain, simple, no ambiguity, you have to give it its literal meaning. No interpretation needed, just apply it as written.
So the words on the page rule, unless they genuinely don't make sense or could mean multiple things.
That's the principle. And importantly, once the Supreme Court does interpret an ambiguous law, that interpretation essentially becomes part of the law itself. It sets a precedent.
Like case law. It gains the force of law.
Yes, exactly. Legis interpretado, legis vim optinet, as the saying goes. But usually these interpretations apply moving forward. It's prospective, think lex prospicit, non respisit. The law looks forward, not backward.
Okay, this brings us to the really tough part. What happens when the law is clear? But following that clear meaning leads to a result that feels, well, harsh, unjust even.
That's the ultimate stress test for judges. The biggest constraint on their power is this. Courts cannot enlarge a statute. They can't restrict it beyond its terms. They cannot legislate from the bench.
They can't rewrite it just because they don't like the outcome.
No. And this leads to that sometimes uncomfortable principle, Dura Lex Sed.
The law is harsh, but it is the law.
Exactly. Judges have to apply the law as written, even if they personally find the result difficult or, harsh. There was a famous case, Pico v. Genosa, where the court basically said, look, our hearts empathize, but we cannot make or invent laws.
Wow. So they essentially said, we see the unfairness, but changing the law isn't our job. Go to Congress or ask the executive for clemency.
That's the message. It highlights the strict boundaries. And this respect for the text even applies to what isn't said. There's another maxim, expressio unius est exclusio ulterius.
Meaning, if they list certain things, they intentionally excluded other things.
Right. If the law says A, B, and C apply, the court usually can't just add D because it seems like it should fit. The assumption is the exclusion was deliberate. You can't just insert meanings.
So, wrapping this up, What's the big takeaway for someone trying to understand how laws work in practice?
Well, it really shows that applying law is this delicate balancing act. You start by respecting the clear, literal words, always. But if, and only if, those words are truly ambiguous, then you carefully search for the underlying spirit, the original intent.
It's a tension, isn't it, between sticking strictly to the text and trying to achieve a just outcome when the text seems to fail? Which makes you wonder, given these limits on judges, especially that Dura Lex Sed Lex idea, does knowing all this push us, as a society, to focus more on getting the laws perfect in the first place? Or does it make us wish for more flexibility, maybe more compassion, from the judges interpreting them? Something to think about.